Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. I watched in disbelief as the tow truck hooked up my car right in front of my house, and the woman behind it was none other than the HOA president, arms crossed, smirking like she owned the entire neighborhood. There was just one little problem. I was the mayor. It all started a few weeks earlier when I moved into Westwood Estates, a high-end, gated community on the outskirts of the city. After years of nonstop politics, late-night meetings, and dealing with city bureaucracy, I wanted a peaceful place to call home, a neighborhood with well-kept streets and friendly neighbors. So I thought I would find a well-run homeowners association. What I got instead was Linda Prescott. Linda, or as the neighbors secretly called her, HOA Karen, was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. She wasn't just the HOA president. She ruled this place like a tyrant. From the moment I moved in, I could feel her eyes on me. Every morning, her golf cart would make slow passes by my house, clipboard in hand, looking for violations. It wasn't long before I became her prime target. It started with a note taped to my front door. Your vehicle must be parked in your garage at all times. Street parking is prohibited under HOA regulations. Failure to comply will result in fines and towing. I stared at the paper, then at my car. It wasn't some clunky old beater. It was my official city vehicle, a black SUV with government plates. Not only was I well within my rights to park it there, but state law also protected government vehicles from restrictions. Still, I believed in being neighborly, so I figured I'd have a chat with Linda and clear things up. That was my first mistake. When I knocked on her door, she answered with an air of smug authority, barely masking her irritation at my presence. Yes, she said, not even bothering with pleasantries. I held up the notice. Hey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is a government vehicle, and by law. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. I don't care whose car it is. This neighborhood has rules. If I let you break them, then everyone will think they can do whatever they want. I frowned, keeping my voice calm. I'm not breaking any rules. This is a city vehicle. I can't override state law. She crossed her arms. In this neighborhood, we follow our rules. If you don't like it, maybe this isn't the right place for you. I was taken aback, but I could see there was no reasoning with her. I nodded, gave her a polite smile, and walked away. If she wanted to play games, I'd let her. I had more important things to do than argue with an overzealous HOA president. But Linda wasn't done. The next morning, another notice appeared. This time, an official violation letter, $250 fine for improper parking, payable within 7 days. I chuckled, shaking my head. She really thought she could find me. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the recycling bin. If she wanted to escalate, I'd let her dig her own hole. 2 days later, I noticed a white sedan parked across the street. A man in sunglasses sat inside, occasionally jotting something down in a notebook. An HOA enforcer, Linda, had hired someone to keep tabs on me. At this point, I could have shut this whole thing down with a single phone call to the city attorney, but I was curious how far she would go. I decided to let this play out. That was when she made her biggest mistake. One evening, as I was finishing up work from home, I heard the unmistakable rumble of a tow truck outside. I stepped onto my porch just in time to see a burly driver attaching chains to my SUV. Linda stood beside him, arms folded, wearing a self-satisfied smirk. I took a slow sip of my coffee and walked down the steps. What's going on here? I asked. Linda's smile widened. You've been warned multiple times. Your vehicle is in violation of HOA regulations. It's being towed at your expense. I raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? The tow truck driver hesitated, glancing at my plates. Ma'am, this is a government vehicle. I don't think we can do. Don't question me. Linda snapped. I have authority here. This vehicle is being removed immediately. I sighed, finally deciding it was time to put an end to this nonsense. All right then, I said, pulling out my phone. I'll need you to wait right here for just a minute. Linda scoffed, calling for backup. Go ahead. The HOA board backs me 100%. I chuckled. Oh, I'm not calling the HOA board. As I hit dial, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The tow truck driver paled, and Linda's smug grin flickered. Moments later, a city patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. An officer stepped out, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. "Mr. Carter," he said, nodding at me. "Everything all right?" Linda turned, looking confused. "Why are you talking to him?" "I called the tow truck." The officer didn't even glance at her. "Mayor Carter, do you need us to intervene?" Linda froze, her mouth opened then closed. Mayor." I smiled. "That's right, Alex Carter, Mayor Alex Carter. And as of this moment, we have a very serious problem." Her face went pale. The tow truck driver immediately started unhooking my SUV. The neighbors, who had begun gathering at a distance, murmured in shock. Linda took a shaky breath. "I had no idea." I held up a hand. "Oh, I know, and that's exactly why this is about to get very interesting." The silence that followed my revelation was almost comical. Linda's face had gone through a series of rapid changes. Smug satisfaction, then confusion, and now pure horror. The tow truck driver, sweating bullets, worked at lightning speed to unhook my SUV as the police officer waited for my response. Linda, however, wasn't one to back down easily. She straightened her posture, clearly trying to regain control. "Well," she huffed, "mayor or not, this community has rules. You can't just—" I held up a hand, cutting her off just like she had done to me earlier. "Actually, Linda, this neighborhood is subject to city regulations, and as you just tried to illegally tow a government vehicle, I'd say we have a bit of an issue." The tow truck driver looked panicked. Now, I didn't know it was illegal. She told me. I turned to him, shaking my head. "You should probably check the laws before you take orders from an HOA president. Consider this a warning." He nodded furiously, finished unhooking my car, and peeled out of there as fast as possible. Linda, however, was not done. She puffed up her chest and turned to the officer. "He's parked in violation of HOA bylaws. Our rules state that." The officer sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Ma'am, HOA bylaws do not override state or city laws. You cannot fine or tow government vehicles. If you had checked with the city, you would have known that." Linda's jaw clenched. "This is harassment," she suddenly shrieked. "You're all ganging up on me." I crossed my arms, my patience wearing thin. "No, Linda, what's harassment is you targeting me, sending enforcers to spy on my house, and trying to enforce illegal fines. But let's put a pin in that for now, because as of this moment, I'm officially launching an investigation into the Westwood Estates HOA." Her eyes widened. You can't do that." I smirked. "Actually, I can, and I just did." The officer gave me a nod before walking back to his patrol car. The neighbors who had been watching from a distance were whispering to each other, some even chuckling. Linda's iron grip on the community had just taken a serious hit, and she knew it. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. The very next morning, a new letter was taped to my door. Final HOA warning. You are in continued violation of HOA parking regulations. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and potential property liens. I laughed out loud. She was actually trying to find the mayor again. But Linda wasn't done. She started ramping up her efforts. Suddenly, I was receiving violation notices for everything. Grass growing too high, violation. Trash can left out for more than an hour after pickup, violation. Exterior lights too bright at night, violation. Each notice came with a fine, each more ridiculous than the last. That same day, I saw a familiar white sedan parked across the street again. Her HOA enforcer blatantly spying on my house. I had to admit, I was impressed by her sheer audacity. I decided it was time to turn up the heat. That evening, I called for a formal city review of the HOA's financials. Within 24 hours, auditors from the city finance department arrived unannounced at the HOA office. The timing couldn't have been better. As the auditors combed through the records, the cracks in Linda's little empire started to show. Misused funds, unexplained transactions, and thousands of dollars in administrative fees with no clear purpose. It was a financial mess. The HOA board, which had previously backed Linda, suddenly started to panic. They were on the hook for the mess she had created. And just like that, the once feared HOA president was now under scrutiny. But Linda still refused to go down quietly. The next morning, she stormed up to my house. Flanked by two board members, "You've gone too far," she snapped. I leaned against my SUV, arms crossed. Have I? You're ruining this neighborhood, she hissed. No one has ever challenged the HOA like this. I gave her a slow smile, and maybe that's a problem. One of the board members, a balding man in his 60s, cleared his throat. Look, Mr. Carter, we don't want trouble. Maybe we can work something out. I raised an eyebrow. Work something out? You mean like letting Linda fine me for nonsense violations or towing my car illegally? He had the decency to look embarrassed. We just want to keep things peaceful. Linda scoffed. He's the mayor. He's supposed to respect authority. I chuckled. Linda, I am the authority, and I respect the law, not power-hungry HOA presidents who think they're above it. Her face turned red. This isn't over, she growled before stomping away. The board members, clearly realizing they were backing the wrong horse, hurried after her, but the damage was done. Word spread fast. Neighbors started sharing their own horror stories. Unjust fines, harassment, ridiculous rules that Linda had imposed on a whim. The tide was turning, and Linda was about to learn what it really meant to pick a fight with the wrong person. Linda was furious, but I could see the cracks forming in her once iron grip over the neighborhood. The moment words spread about my audit, more residents started stepping forward with their own grievances. It was almost like a domino effect. One by one, homeowners who had been too scared to speak up before were now openly complaining about the ridiculous fines and abuse of power. Still, Linda wasn't the type to surrender easily. If anything, she was doubling down, determined to prove she was in control. She made that clear the next day when a new letter appeared on my doorstep, this time in bold red ink. Final notice. Your outstanding violations have exceeded community tolerance per HOA bylaws. Failure to pay your fines may result in legal action, including but not limited to property liens and court proceedings. I had to laugh. Property liens? She was threatening to take the mayor to court over some imaginary infractions. This woman was either fearless or completely out of her mind. That same afternoon, I received an official email from the HOA board calling for an emergency community meeting. The reason? Urgent review of HOA policies and continued noncompliance by certain residents. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. This was Linda's last attempt to rally her troops. I decided to attend. The meeting was held in the community center, a polished, upscale building meant to project an air of sophistication. When I arrived, the place was packed, residents whispering to one another, waiting to see how this battle would unfold. At the front of the room, Linda sat at a long table with the rest of the HOA board, looking smug and confident as if she had already won. She stood and addressed the crowd. Neighbors, there is a serious problem in our community. Some people believe they are above the rules. Some people think they can undermine our authority and create chaos in our beautiful neighborhood. Her gaze landed on me. I smiled and leaned back in my chair. Linda continued, the HOA exists to maintain order. Without rules, we would have unkempt lawns, abandoned vehicles, and property values would plummet. A few people in the audience nodded, but many looked skeptical. The tide had already started shifting. I raised my hand casually. Linda, if I may. She pursed her lips, but forced a smile. Go ahead. I stood and faced the room. Neighbors, I moved here for the same reason you did, to enjoy a nice, peaceful community. I have no problem following reasonable rules, but what we have here isn't an HOA looking out for homeowners. It's one person, I gestured at Linda, on a power trip, making arbitrary decisions without input from the rest of you. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I continued, I've reviewed the HOA's financials. Did you all know that over the past 5 years, our HOA dues have increased by 40%, and yet there's no significant improvement in community amenities? A few people gasped, others started whispering urgently. Linda's face turned red. That is an outrageous accusation. I pulled out a folder and held it up. These are public records, Linda. Anyone here can request them. There are unexplained charges labeled as administrative expenses that amount to thousands of dollars. Would you like to explain those? The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaware of this either. Linda's smile faltered. Those expenses were necessary for, I held up a hand. Better yet, Let's talk about enforcement. How many of you have been fined for something ridiculous? Dozens of hands shot up. How many of you have appealed those fines and been denied? The same hand stayed up. Linda's expression hardened. The HOA has always acted within its rights. Has it? I turned back to the crowd. Because under city law, an HOA cannot fine residents for things that violate state or municipal regulations and towing a government vehicle. That's an illegal action. The tow truck incident had already spread through the neighborhood, and now, seeing Linda's panicked expression, people were realizing just how out of control she had been. One homeowner stood up. She fined me $500 because my Christmas lights were up 2 days past the deadline. Another chimed in. She tried to evict my tenant because she didn't like their car. More people started speaking up. Suddenly, Linda wasn't facing just me. She was facing the entire neighborhood. The board members were visibly sweating now. One of them, an older woman with silver hair, turned to Linda and whispered something. Linda's smirk was gone. She was pale now, realizing she was losing control. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. This HOA is meant to serve the community, not the other way around. It's time for change. A nervous-looking man in his 50s cleared his throat. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Carter? I folded my arms as Linda's eyes widened. You can't do that. Actually, I said with a smirk, under HOA bylaws, any major community decision, including board leadership, can be voted on if more than half the residents agree. And, judging by the hands I just saw, I think we easily have the numbers. The room erupted in chatter. Linda was trapped. I turned to the board members and motioned for an immediate vote on HOA leadership. The silver-haired woman, who looked like she had long grown tired of Linda, nodded slowly and seconded the motion. Just like that, the vote began. Homeowners lined up to cast their votes, whispering to each other about years of resentment finally boiling over. Even some of Linda's former allies had turned against her, realizing they had backed the wrong person. By the time the results were tallied, it wasn't even close. Linda Prescott was officially removed as HOA president. She stood there in shock, shaking her head. You can't do this. I built this neighborhood. The silver-haired woman stood up. No, Linda, you controlled it, but not anymore. The room erupted in cheers. I leaned in slightly. Oh, and Linda, there's still the matter of the financial discrepancies. Expect a visit from the city auditors soon. Her face drained of all color as I turned to leave. Neighbors patted me on the back, thanking me. One even muttered, "Best mayor we've ever had." Meanwhile, Linda stood frozen at the front of the room, realizing that not only had she lost her power, but she had also just made a very powerful enemy. And I wasn't done with her yet. Linda stood at the front of the room, her hands trembling as the reality of her downfall set in. The woman who had once ruled Westwood Estates with an iron fist was now just another resident, stripped of her title, her power, and soon, her reputation. The community had spoken. The vote was decisive, but the real damage was just beginning. The very next morning, I received an urgent phone call from the city finance department. The audit I had requested had turned up something even bigger than I expected. The HOA's financial records were a mess. Dozens of misallocated funds, suspicious transactions, and hefty administrative expenses that had no justification. The city's legal department wasted no time. That afternoon, they sent an official notice to the Westwood Estates HOA, demanding full transparency and an explanation for the discrepancies. The new HOA board, now led by the silver-haired woman, Nancy Carter, no relation to me, immediately called for an emergency review. I decided to attend. By the time I arrived at the community center, it was clear that the tide had completely turned. Residents who had once been afraid to speak against Linda were now openly discussing how unfair her rule had been. Some shared horror stories, fines for ridiculous reasons, threats of legal action, and even rumors that Linda had pocketed money. Set for community improvements, Linda, however, was nowhere to be seen. Nancy called the meeting to order. We're here to review the financial status of the HOA, including questionable expenses made during Linda Prescott's time as president. One of the new board members, a retired accountant named Frank, stood up and adjusted his glasses. He held up a thick folder. After reviewing the records, I can confidently say that there is a serious case of financial mismanagement here. There are tens of thousands of dollars missing, unexplained, or allocated to administrative fees with no receipts. A murmur spread through the room. Frank continued, "Some of these expenses appear to have been direct payments to Linda Prescott herself. Over $330,000 in community improvement fees that have no corresponding work orders or invoices." Gasps filled the hall. Nancy shook her head. Linda was collecting HOA dues under the guise of making improvements, but instead, she was using them for personal gain. Before anyone could answer, the doors to the community center burst open. Linda stormed in, her face red with rage. "You can't do this. You have no authority to investigate me." Nancy didn't flinch. "Linda, you're no longer HOA president. You have no say here." Linda's nostrils flared. "I built this HOA. I made this community what it is. And this is the thanks I get." I leaned forward. "No, Linda, you exploited this community, and now you're going to have to answer for it." She turned to the crowd, her eyes darting around looking for support, but she found none. Then came the final blow. A police officer stepped forward from the back of the room. "Mrs. Prescott, we have received multiple complaints and formal charges related to financial misconduct and misallocation of HOA funds. We have reason to believe that you have engaged in fraudulent activity." Linda's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. This is a witch hunt." The officer held up a document. "A subpoena has been issued for your financial records. You will need to come with us for questioning." The room was dead silent. Then, as if realizing the full weight of her situation, Linda did something none of us expected. She ran. She bolted for the exit, shoving past residents in a last-ditch attempt to escape. But before she could get far, the officer and two others blocked her path. She struggled, screaming in protest, but it was over. The community that had once cowered under her rule now watched as she was let out in handcuffs. The HOA board sat in stunned silence. It was Nancy who finally broke it. "Well," she said, "I think it's safe to say that real change is finally happening in this neighborhood." The room erupted in cheers. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. Linda had spent years ruling with an iron fist, thinking she was untouchable. But the moment she tried to pull her nonsense on the wrong person, on me, her entire house of cards came crashing down and justice was finally served. Linda's reign of terror had officially ended. The moment she was let out in handcuffs, the community broke into cheers. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to challenge her were now openly celebrating her downfall. But for me, the job wasn't done yet. Taking down an HOA tyrant like Linda wasn't just about removing her from power. It was about making sure she could never abuse another community again. I had just a plan to make sure of that. With Linda gone, the new HOA board wasted no time fixing the disaster she had left behind. All bogus fines were revoked. Homeowners who had been forced to pay absurd penalties for things like too many plants or having a visible trash bin were given full refunds. HOA fees were lowered. Without Linda's embezzlement draining the funds, the new board realized they could easily cut down the costs. Security patrols were replaced. No more creepy enforcers driving around in unmarked cars, spying on people's houses. The best part? HOA meetings were now public. Every decision had to be voted on by homeowners. No more secret rule changes. No more shady financial dealings. For the first time in years, the people of Westwood Estates actually liked their HOA. But as satisfying as it was to see Linda stripped of her power, I wasn't quite finished. About a month after her arrest, I received a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was another leftover HOA notice, but when I opened it, I had to stifle a laugh. Linda was suing me. She claimed that I had defamed her, that my interference in HOA affairs had caused her to suffer emotional distress and irreparable damage to her reputation. She demanded $500,000 in damages. I nearly spit out my coffee. The woman who had spent years harassing innocent homeowners was now claiming she was the victim. I handed the letter to my lawyer. He took one glance at it and smirked. This won't even make it past the first hearing. And he was right. When we arrived in court, Linda showed up wearing the same smug expression she had worn when she first threatened to tow my car. She thought she still had some kind of power. The judge, however, wasn't buying it. After reviewing the evidence, including the financial audit, the illegal towing attempt, and witness testimony from multiple homeowners, her lawsuit was immediately dismissed. But the best part? The judge ordered her to pay my legal fees. As we walked out of the courtroom, I turned to her and gave her a slow, satisfied smile. Next time, Linda, maybe don't pick a fight with the mayor. Her face turned red, and she stormed off without another word. But I wasn't done yet. Linda might have been removed from Westwood Estates, but I wanted to make sure she never pulled this stunt anywhere else. So I made a few calls. First, I contacted the state HOA regulatory board. You see, Linda hadn't just ruled over Westwood Estates. She had previously served on HOA boards in 2 other communities. Based on what I found, those neighborhoods had mysteriously collapsed due to financial mismanagement right after she left. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? I made sure the state had access to every bit of evidence from our investigation. A week later, they issued an official ban on Linda Prescott serving on any HOA board in the state. She would never be allowed to run another HOA again, but I wasn't quite done. A few days later, I got a call from a local investigative journalist. Turns out she had been following the story ever since Linda's arrest and wanted an exclusive interview. So I told her everything: the illegal fines, the financial fraud, the harassment of homeowners. The next morning, the front page of the city newspaper read, HOA Tyranny exposed, how one mayor took down a corrupt HOA president. And just like that, Linda Prescott's name was permanently tied to scandal. No more HOA power, no more cushy neighborhood rule, just the cold, hard truth for everyone to see. A few weeks later, I received another letter in the mail. This time it wasn't a lawsuit. It was a letter from Linda. Gone was the arrogance, the legal threats, the power-hungry attitude. Instead, the letter was filled with pathetic pleas for sympathy. She wrote about how she had lost everything, how she was being forced to sell her house, how no one in the community would even speak to her anymore. And then, at the very end, she wrote something that actually made me laugh out loud. Mr. Carter, I know we've had our differences, but I would really appreciate it if you could write me a character reference for my upcoming trial. I believe you, as mayor, could help explain that I was only doing what I thought was best for the community. A character reference for me? I shook my head, then grabbed a blank sheet of paper and wrote my response. Linda, you once told me that HOA rules are absolute. I guess now you're learning that real laws are too. Good luck, Mayor Alex Carter. I sealed the letter and sent it off. I never heard from her again. With Linda gone for good, the neighborhood flourished. The HOA finally worked for the homeowners instead of against them. Community barbecues, events, and gatherings returned. The atmosphere changed from fear and tension to peace and cooperation. As for me, I stayed in Westwood Estates, and every time I parked my government SUV right in front of my house, I smiled because there were no more HOA notices, no more threats, no more Karen watching my every move. Just peace, quiet, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. And if any future HOA Karen thought about pulling something similar, well, they'd better remember what happened to the last one. So what do you think? Was it the ultimate HOA revenge or what? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because I've got plenty more HOA nightmare stories coming your way.